How did I get all of these opportunities and learn all of these things? What was the purpose of that? Could it have been just so I can be happy and I can make money? It felt like there had to be a different reason.
My guest today is Rania Anderson. Rania spent much of her career as an executive at Bank of America and is currently an executive coach and an author of 2 great books, which we list on our website. Rania and I are neighbors where we both live on an island near Seattle, and I knew she would be a great Zero to Proof guest because of her professional career path in a large corporation, followed by the path she chose and has lived since then. In this conversation, we get into what it actually means to reach a point where you have nothing left to prove. Rania breaks it down into 3 core building blocks: doing work you genuinely love and are good at. The latter is very important. Operating with purpose, not as something you find, but as how you show up every day, and continuing to pursue mastery without needing external validation. We also talk about letting go of approval, redefining success on your own terms, and why Zero to Prove has nothing to do with slowing down. This is a practical conversation about what comes after achievement and how to build a life that still challenges and fulfills you. Rania, thank you so much for coming. Welcome. And, maybe tell us a little bit about, you have a super unique journey and life that I found both inspiring and just, super interesting every time I hear you. So if you don't mind sharing a little.
Great. And I'll kind of share, thank you for having me on, and I'll share at a high level and we can dive into any parts that seem more interesting. So, I am originally from the Middle East. I came to the United States to go to college, and I started college when I was 16 years old. So, I was this young, naive gal from the Middle East thrown into, a brand new culture and, college and a different country and all of those things. Studied business in school, went on to get my master's at Georgetown University, and then started working in banking. And I was an international commercial lender. So I lent money to businesses kind of at a really large scale. Through that process, when you lend money to a company, you're evaluating not just their business, as you know, Anthony, but the team, the leadership team. They're the people who ostensibly are going to pay you back, right? So you learn a lot
Yes.
about
Yes.
how people lead and manage their business as well as the business model. Did that for a few years, and then I worked for Bank of America, and that was the time when the bank was growing very, very quickly. And Bank of America's leadership development process was to take talent and put them into various different roles. So I was pulled out of one function and asked to go into recruiting new talent for the management training program. And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. There, that's all right. You'll figure it out. Go.
Yeah.
And that happened through lots and lots of different opportunities at the bank. And my last position at the bank, I was an executive coach internally to some of our bank presidents. So I had seen the bank from lots of different perspectives and then had that opportunity. And then Lance and I moved to Kansas City. He set up a company there that he eventually took public. And I still worked for the bank. And this was in 1997 when there was no real technology for working from home. But I worked on national projects for the bank. But I was stuck in a house by myself, on the phone. This was early web, stuff. I know you know a lot more about this than I do. One day I started talking to an entrepreneur who was selling her business to someone who worked for her. And I started asking her a lot of questions. And she said, "How do you know all this?" I said, "Well, I'm a former banker and I've done some coaching." And she said, "Well, can you help me?" And I thought, I don't know, can I help her? Kind of was like, yeah, I think I can help you. And so I started to work with her and the person buying the company. And that's how I kind of went into the coaching side. And I'll say 2 more things and then
Good.
and come back to your question, from there, then it was a discovery of how do I want to do this kind of work? At that point, I was still working full time. So just had gone from a corporate role to a consulting role. I did strategic planning. I did teamwork. I did, working with entrepreneurs. I coached different people. I mean, it took time to develop that, but it was still a full-time gig, just a different gig. But the kind of the zero to prove moments came a little bit later. But I'll stop at that point and just see if there's anything you want to focus on before we go further into that part of it.
Yeah, I think you're glossing over some probably pretty interesting achievements in a path that, as you said, it was, I'll say, more traditional in the sense it was a
Yep.
classic corporate job, in a bank. And I would say, and then, well, you transitioned, but the reason you were successfully transitioning is, I'm guessing there's some things you learned as you described it. I mean, it's when you're lending to a company, you're lending to the people. And so what were the things you learned essentially that ultimately gave you this path to what became, your work? Was what did you learn in the process of learning that it was actually the people more than the balance sheet that were the issue? Kind of what was
Yeah,
that
I
learning?
think there were a couple of I think of my life a lot in terms of you may as well, these defining moments that seem sometimes very small, but they color so much to come. And one of them comes from the bank, and people will find this, I think, unusual when we think about banking. I had one of my managers at the bank said to me one time when I was trying something, "Oh, great. You're making all the right mistakes." And he
Yeah.
had this big smile on his face, and I thought, "Jiminy Christmas, I just totally screwed this up. What are you saying to me?" He was saying, what it obviously is, you were very logical, you thought through all the things you thought through, you made a decision. It didn't work out for these various reasons, but it was not an ill-thought decision. It was a smart choice, just didn't happen to work out. And that phrase made me think a lot about risk. And as I started to work, in lending money and seeing people and how they looked at their own business and how they worked together as a team, I noticed that thing of the ability to move quickly, to make decisions. And that was one of those things that said to me, I can take this leap, right, into more of a non traditional. Part of it comes from, an immigrant background. Like, I moved to the United States when I was 16 years old, and, I've kind of figured that out. And so it's that, I think that's one of the underlying things that help people to eventually get to the point where they can take the risk of
Yeah.
creating a life that they want, right? A different kind of life, which I know we'll get to. And I'll say one more thing about that. I think all of those steps also taught me a lot about my strengths and what I enjoy doing, right? You can be really good at something and not enjoy doing it. And when you find the things you're really good at doing and you enjoy doing, then you can keep honing in on that. Anthony, as I thought about this whole premise, that I think you've very astutely figured out or are trying to get at, I don't think you can create the kind of life we're talking about in the zero to prove if you're not doing what you love, because you wouldn't want to keep doing it.
Yeah. No, I think that's it was interesting. I don't know if you watched the Grammys, which were on a
A
couple
little
of
bit.
days ago, a little bit. So there's a clip, which I'm going to send you, from Pharrell Williams. So Pharrell Williams got an award. And when he stood up to receive it, he talked a little bit. And then one of the things he said, two these people who are all performers was never stop working. And the point of that was for what you're just getting at. This is what we love. This is how we contribute. This is the nature of our value add to the world. And it's also incredibly energizing. And eventually, I don't know if he said that's you'll get paid for it. I don't know the exact words, but it was something along the lines you were talking about. Is it's sort of like finding that sweet spot where it is a combination of those things. Because as we'll get to, I had a couple other questions for you. Is you have to be able to take a risk that betting on that part of you is going to work out, and which if you hate it, it's not something that's going to make any sense. And so the thing I wanted to come back to though is I think also you're not only speak of yourself as an immigrant, but a woman in a very high powered environment, which is, I'm guessing, like many, more male oriented, male dominated. So what were the things that you learned along the way that enabled you to be successful in that environment and then actually even transition to, I would say, almost a more powerful role of that level of trust? So how did
Yeah,
you deal with that?
I think it was, multifaceted like a lot of these things are. Being in corporate America in the 80s was a very different environment. We didn't talk a lot about, women's rights and being slighted. And, we
Yeah.
kind of grinned and took it on in some ways. And you can see the positive sides of that and the negative
Yeah.
sides of that. I think one of the biggest things was just being who I was and not being apologetic or minimizing of being a woman or having a different style. I think the second part, and this is really important still in my career, and I think in a lot of people's careers, I had male allies, who would stand up for me if something wasn't right. They weren't the savior. I wasn't the damsel in distress, but they would say, That's not cool," or "We don't talk like that here," or "That's not appropriate." And they weren't saying it to save me. They were saying it to save the culture. Like in our culture, we don't accept this for any of us, the women, the men, we don't accept this. And I think that standing up for your colleagues on many levels makes a big difference. I also had, and this is something people don't talk a lot about in career, I also had sponsors, so different than mentors. So as you're maybe very familiar with that term, some
Yeah.
listeners may or may not be, but a sponsor is someone who advocates for you and creates opportunities. And I had an amazing sponsor at the bank. He was one of the bank presidents, and he would say, essentially give her this opportunity when other people would say, well, we haven't put a woman in that role, or she's too young, or and he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I got it, but let's give it a shot. That also helped. And then stepping up myself, right, doing the work that needed to be done.
Yeah.
I
You
think
proved
those are
yourself,
the
but that
ways.
gave you came up with two, I think, really important archetypes, allies and sponsors. Mentors is another one, but I think mentors are less involved. Okay. Where
Yeah.
allies and sponsors are in the game with you in some form or another. How did that epiphany lead to, you making, I hate to say pivot, but making a change in focus? Because for a lot of people, those are very scary things. You decided you stayed in the bank, you stayed in the environment, but you shifted pretty dramatically the role you were in, which broadened you tremendously in lots of ways. So what would you say were the led you to make that shift? And what were the things that surprised you? And then kind of the whatever the takeaways from,
Yeah.
if you will. Step one was the shift inside the company. There's another shift later, which were I'm going to take this differently, but on the first step.
I think this shift in the company wasn't so scary because I did so many, and so did all the other high performing people around me. So the bank at the time normalized that.
Yeah.
And, when I'm coaching young people today, I talk to them a lot about that. And sometimes people feel very resistant to this idea like, well, I'm a marketing person, or I'm a product person, or I'm a technology. And it's like, No, you're a thinker. You're a problem solver. You're, a leader of people. Just go, try different things. So that didn't seem so scary because I did it so many times at lower levels that the switch out was very scary, and it took a long time to build a sustainable
Yeah,
business.
I bet. Yeah. So, I want to get to that, but there's an interesting thing that I'd like to dig into a little bit because what you said about the culture you were in was a very positive statement about that culture.
Mm.
Was that the fact that the culture encouraged coaching and encouraged mentoring and actually the role you described existed? Because I think a lot of people look at big corporations as these soulless things, and many might be, but many are not. Many actually spend a lot of time trying to grow culture. And I think one of the things I take away is that may not have been the reason you chose the bank to begin with, but you were fortunate to be in a culture. Because I look at my own career, I was very fortunate to end up in cultures that created a lot of the ethos that helped me grow. And very different in a lot of ways. But I think very few people would think of Bank of America as having a good culture. I mean, I just, I mean, and so if you talk a little bit about that, because I think part of the thing today is this evolved the sense that big companies are bad. And I think for many, many people, it was quite a positive. It had its challenges, like anything, but there's a lot that you wouldn't be where you were if you and where you
Noted.
are if you hadn't had that. So, maybe talk a little bit about that culture and what, and reflecting because you see lots of cultures. What were the positive attributes that, in hindsight, you look at the bank and said, wow, there were some great things? Because people, I think, should be looking at the culture of the place they're in and whether it's conducive to this.
Yeah, to be clear, I can't speak to the culture at Bank of America today.
No, no, but that's not the, yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And I wanted to just key in because I think this is an interesting point of something you said a minute ago, Anthony. When you and I started in our career, nobody asked you what you wanted to do and what your life
yeah,
purpose was and what your
yeah.
strengths. They just told you to go get a
Go
job.
do, yeah, exactly.
My dad said, "Oh, I think you should, baking, that's good. Go, like, do that." So I'm like, "Okay." Didn't know anything about it. So, was very lucky. What I saw in that culture, I think what's kept me going and sort of is core to who I am today as a professional is this ability and interest in learning and developing people. So, if you're looking for a corporate career or you're in a corporate career, you wanna look for that. Is this a place that's gonna invest in you through mentors, sponsors? I think some people have this misnomer, it's how much money are they gonna spend to send me to a training program? That's not it. That's cool if they do that, but it's more, are they putting you in hot water and, giving you a startup or a fix it or a scaling opportunity? Are they giving you feedback? Are they challenging you? Like, did you read this? Did you see this? What about this? What do you think of this? That's the kind of environment you want because, I mean, this is an adage, but it couldn't be more true today. It's not what you know, it's how fast you can learn. That's it.
And I think the other thing you're highlighting there is something, when we started out, there was a sense that you also had to work hard and earn. The company is going to give you the opportunity. You're going to want to find a place with the opportunities you described, and then you have to perform. There's a sense I think I hear today of, what's the company going to do for me? And I mean, I think the bottom line is that's not their job. Their job is to give you an opportunity and to let you do things, that raise the bar and raise the elevation. And I think, you hit on that. And that's a super important piece. That gave you the opportunity, to be where you are, but you had to go out and do it. They put you on the field, but you had to go. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say I worked extremely hard, long hours, very challenging. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I don't think obviously, I didn't have all the insights about that experience that I have today, looking back. But yes, I mean, you had to prove yourself over and over and over and learn, and get struck down and have your
Yeah.
boss tell you, I remember a time being on the phone berating someone within the bank and my manager walking in and, just completely dressed me down of, why would you talk to somebody like that? And so it's not just the what, but the how, right?
Yeah.
All of those things come into play. Again, I think the thread is they allow you to then look at where are the moments that I excelled and enjoyed. You start to piece those pieces together so that you can do the pivot or start your business
Yeah.
or eventually someday have a zero to prove. Again, one of the things you said in your pilot episode is, yes, this is what, more experienced older people in their careers are going to do. But this opportunity of the term you're using of zero to prove could come to somebody else if they can hone in on those things. What do I love? How do I keep growing? And what do I want? Right?
And how do I deliver, you said it when your very first client, so I want to kind of get to the transition from I'm doing this inside of the bank to I'm doing it, independently, where you delivered value to someone. And, so there's kind of two parts of it. One of them, is realizing where you deliver value. I think you sort of said, where are those places you deliver value? And then the second piece is you got to find the people to deliver value to. And so, that shift, there was a moment, and I don't know if there was a moment or it was a long series of moments where you decided to make the change from stepping out of kind of the safe place where, I don't know if your dad was still alive, but said, what are you thinking? It might have. Tell us a little bit about that, that transition. Cause it's for a lot of people, you stay in the corporate job until you're done. And that's not what you did.
Yeah, I think the first transition into, the consulting coaching outside the bank was a recognition of what gives me joy or fulfillment. And this doesn't. Therefore, I've got to take a risk and try something else. So it was that, like I talk to clients today who are fulfilled in their roles and not fulfilled in their roles. And can you, face the music and go, yes, I might be good at this, but I'm not enjoying it. So it was that.
So that was for you. You had one of those either moments or extended moment. Yeah.
This job is not hitting all the buttons anymore.
Anymore. I'm done. Or I've been there, done that, something. Yeah.
Fabulous. I've learned so much. I have this great foundation, but this isn't the right environment for me anymore. And I wasn't exactly sure what would be, but it was like, okay, just try it, and I don't know how it was like for you, Anthony, at various points, but there is a confidence in your skill set that you can go, okay, well, if it doesn't work, I can always go get another corporate job.
Yeah. And that's a confidence in yourself
Yep.
that, right, that no one else can give you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit, if you will. It sounds like it kind of started as I'll call it a side gig. You started doing this, and then there was a moment, where. So if we talk about maybe that transition to you started doing it, kind of in addition to your full time job, and then there came a moment where
Yes.
you jumped.
Yeah, so I jumped first and started to build this business of consulting and coaching, but it took a long time to scale it and to achieve the kind of financial reward that I had in the corporate career. It wasn't, I was in a city I didn't know. I wasn't an experienced external coach. So there was a lot to do to build a business, and I had, financial goals in mind for myself and types of clients I wanted, etc. So building that business, it just took time, but eventually I had a nice business going. I had a couple people working with me and I was, content doing that, and it was a full-time gig. I think the start of the and we can talk about any of that you want, but the start of the kind of the zero to prove stuff of, okay, what if this isn't a full-time gig? What is it I want from my life? How do I go from here? Kind of took me all the way back to childhood. So when I turned 50 years old, I kind of had this wrestling with myself that a lot of people have at various stages of their life. And the question that I kept asking myself was, how did I get all of these opportunities and learn all of these things? What was the purpose of that? Could it have been just so I can be happy and I can make money? It felt like there had to be a different reason. Women from the Middle East don't get these types of opportunities in the plenty, right? Certainly some do, but not all. And that took me to wanting to take everything I had learned and figure out how can women in more patriarchal societies and more traditional societies learn from that. And I'll layer in one more piece because I think it ties it all together. I think of myself as a student of success. That's kind of at the
No,
basis.
I would that's a just pause for a moment. That's a super interesting I love that. So, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's kind of underlies everything that, I do. It's like when I was at the bank, how do these people successfully run their companies? When I was coaching people, what makes Anthony successful at what he's doing and the way he's doing it? And so a lot of times people want to talk about obstacles and barriers, right? Especially regarding women in emerging economies. Oh, it's so bad. The culture is horrible, machismo, the Soviet Union influence, imperialism, it's like all this, education. And I just kept looking like, okay, well, there's hundreds of millions of people succeeding. Why can't we look at what they're doing? One of, I haven't gotten to this part yet, but I eventually wrote a book. And one of the women I interviewed, Manara Al-Manif is her name. She's from Saudi Arabia. She was the COO of General Electric for the entire Middle Eastern region. How did she get there? There was a pathway, right? So instead of talking more about the obstacle, why don't we, look for the pathways? And so I spent 4 years traveling to emerging economies, did a bunch of research. How are women in these countries succeeding? And eventually wrote a book. And that was kind of the start of okay, I want to do this differently. What is it I want to do? Which, a lot of fast forward is where I am today, kind of coming back full circle.
It's awesome. I wanna get your book and put it on the website, and if you talk a little bit about, I mean, what you did in your journey and just that North Star of, what's the path, or what's the playbook, of
Yeah.
success? Because as I'm sure you learned, there's a lot of consistent things that people who are successful do regardless of, which path they're on. Share a little bit about what your business is, what you do, the thing you did full time, and then there's this, the transition to it's not I wanna have mm, I wanna it's not I don't wanna do it full time, but I don't wanna stop. So those kinda 2 things. What's it? And then this, the what's your life like now, and then how you got to that.
Perfect. So my business today, interestingly, I went to I'll talk about it in a second, a much bigger place, and then on a global stage, and then went all the way back to coaching, and I'll say why. And today, my kind of zero to prove lifestyle is back to coaching executive leaders in corporations and startups and etc. That's the core of my business. It's actually the only thing I'm doing now. So that's kind of how I skinnied it back down. But through that arc, so I wrote the first book, Undeterred, The Six Success Habits of Women in Emerging Economies. So there was a playbook and I was
Yeah.
able to uncover it and share it. And I wrote a second book for mostly for male leaders around how to work with women in the workplace. That book is called We. And then I went traveling around the world speaking on global stages in corporations and public forums around these two concepts. And what I've learned that I want to share around Zero to Prove is you eventually learn that the only thing you have to prove is to yourself.
Self.
I
Yep.
think
And
I want
if I was going to pause for a moment, that's the shift. You're no longer proving something to somebody else. You're proving things to yourself. You're doing it. I won't say you're doing it for you because, as you said, you're working on things that matter. You're making an impact and making a difference. But the person, if you're proving, if you will, is you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it does matter, and those things are true, and there's some part of you that is ambitious and
Yeah.
accomplished and wants to show everyone that you're smart and, you're looking for accolades and, there I went through all of that. It does feel amazing when you're standing on a stage and 1,000 people are in the room and they're excited about what you're telling them. I talk about moments, and I think that I've had those moments. I had this aha one day in all the places I went. So I was in Latin America, I was in South Africa, I was in the Middle East, I was in Ukraine a lot, I was in the Republic of Georgia, I was in Moldova, it was all these places. Every single time, Anthony, one person would wait at the end of all the people that come to talk to you, and they would say something or ask me a question. And I knew unequivocally that the reason I was there that day was for that person.
Yeah,
Not for,
that's a pause moment.
yeah,
So
it was really just for that person and for me. And it gave me the notion that, who's to say one life doesn't matter? One life matters. Every single one of those one persons in every speaking engagement I have, I am still in touch with.
yeah,
So
that's amazing. Yeah.
they email me and say, "Guess what I'm doing now?" And, all that kind of stuff. So and sometimes I would be there and there was no person, and I'd be walking out the door. I'm not making this up. The person was standing out there. They were so shy they couldn't have come into the room. They were just standing in the hallway to ask me, and they were the person.
I want to, before you go off of that,
Yeah.
those people, those are the people, among others, but those people are friends professionally that became more. Because that's one of the things that I have found for myself, but also a lot of people is through work and the performance of the things you come in touch with people that you didn't meet socially, you met professionally, but stayed in your life because and I call those people friends. And some people go, oh, those aren't friends. Friends are the ones and I was like, no, they are. They're a type of friend, and they're a very important type of friend because all those people that you had in all those places keep you, in my experience, tell me if it's true for you, they keep you connected to those moments, those people that impact those places. And so I don't know if that was true for you, but when you said that, it really hit me.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that is true. I don't know that I would describe necessarily those one people. Yes, it's a friendly relationship. I did form professional friendships unequivocally with the people that were helping me set up all of these sessions, and those people are my professional friend network, and they are the
Yeah.
ones making change today. I think that these people that I mentioned that was the person,
Yeah.
it's continued to stay more of a mentoring
Okay.
kind of.
So for me, I have those two. I classify all of those, to say,
Yes.
yeah, friends might be the wrong term, but as you said, you look back at your career, you had mentors, you had allies. They're not allies, I'm not sponsoring them, but I am mentoring, and people come up to me that I haven't seen. So I absolutely resonate with that. And I think that's true for lots of people. As you go through life and go through career, those people that you touched and touched you, they matter.
So I want to get back to kind of the key points. So then I was doing that work and that was great. I had this, huge epiphany. And then, and Anthony, I'm sure you could talk about this in a much bigger scope than I can, but no, I think you can. There was a gap in the marketplace when I started doing this work, and I saw it and I knew I had the ability to begin to close it. And I took the opportunity and did the work in both cases, both for emerging women and for men in the workplace. As I continued to do the work, many, many other players entered the market and did the work, in some cases, way, way better than I did, right? They came from universities and they had research students. I did first person research. They had, interns and data, and some people came at it, from a corporate perspective. And then there were a lot of resources and the gap got filled, right?
Mhm.
And I noticed that and I thought, I'm good. My work's done
Yeah.
here, right? Like I did my little part of it. The story of I always think of this, the people picking up the starfish that, they're walking down the beach and there's all these starfish and, they're throwing the starfish back in the water and somebody says, what are you doing? And they said, well, there's putting the starfish back in the water. And they said, well, can't you see there's hundreds of starfish out? Well, I'm saving this one. Like
This one, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
doing I did my part and it was good. It was good for a lot of people. It was good for me. I proved a lot of things to myself. And then it was like, okay, call it a day, right?
Yeah.
Lots of other people are now doing this. And now going to the zero to prove moment, I'm at a stage in my career. I've checked the things I wanted to accomplish. So now let me go back to what I really love doing and what I think I'm best at. And that's coaching people one on one. And so in the skinnying down of now it's not going to be full time, word I like to use for myself is your livelihood fits into your life. You're not balancing balls. You're not, it's not the work life balance. It's like the livelihood has a space in my life and it's a big one and it's an important one. And I love it, but it's just fitting in there. And then I can structure the rest of all the things I want to do.
And that's if I can if I can dive into that a little bit because you're at a place where you don't need to do this anymore from a financial point of view.
That's
Okay.
correct.
However, here you are. And as you said, you want this to be part of your life, but you don't want it to take over your life. And so tell me why. Why is it that you keep going? I mean, you sort of alluded to this in a bunch of ways, but that I think is a question people face. Because I've had people ask me that, why don't you just stop? And it's like, I don't, for all kinds of reasons. It was the Pharrell Williams because this work is energizing and I make a difference. I feel like I'm making contribution. So what is it that has led you? Because I know we've talked and you have these moments of, and you don't want to stop. And then how do you structure this? How do you balance is the wrong word. I think you said that. How do you integrate, the life of which this is a part? Kind of the first why and then how.
I think the things that you mentioned definitely are part of it for me. I love intellectual challenge. I am constantly, constantly growing and honing my craft. So even though in some ways I've scaled back, I'm at the top of my game and literally every single day I'm thinking, how do I be a better coach? What do I need to learn? How do I learn it? Who's doing it? And I love that. Lance, my husband, said this to me. I don't know where it comes from, if he made it up or it came from somewhere else, but this is what I'm best at. I am not a person who has tons of different hobbies or interests. I love my work and so that's part of it. It doesn't feel so much like work to me. I've done the philanthropy thing. I still do a lot of philanthropy, but that doesn't do it for me, right? It's a part of it, but it can't be the whole thing. I don't want to just garden or any number of hobbies. I'm not putting sometimes I wish I did. I feel like I need to use my brain, and this is how I know I need to do it.
That's both wonderful and it's great because you're not only not done learning, you're not done contributing. And I think,
Yeah.
there's an energy that comes from, I mean, gardening, if that's your thing, is fun, or woodworking, they're fun, but what you're doing is giving and contributing and giving.
And it's
Yeah,
fun for me.
for me,
It's
yes.
it's fun for me.
If
Yeah.
you hated it, you wouldn't do it.
And I
So
think that's the key thing. If you don't enjoy what you do so much, you would never do what you're doing or I'm doing or all the other people you're gonna talk to. It's the prerequisite.
absolutely. What one of the challenges when I talk to people that you've overcome is doing this alone. Okay, is you're Rania Inc.
Yep.
And I mean you had a team at one point, but those were people who worked for you, not
Yeah.
not if you will. How did you get there? Is it your business is mostly referrals and word of mouth?
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what have you thought about wanting to do this with other people, or is it more or less it's fine the way it is? Talk a little bit about the alone. That's the wrong word.
It
Talk about
really is.
doing this as yeah.
Yeah, I think the model you have, Anthony, is super interesting. I didn't manage to do that. Part of it was people wanted me, and if I gave them somebody more junior, they didn't want that. So that didn't work. And now, in this kind of zero to prove moment, I don't want to do that. Again, I think the model you have is really interesting. I think it is lonely, and I love my clients, and they are my friends, and we stay in touch even when we're
Sure.
done, but they're not my team, and
Yeah.
so is the element of it that is maybe not as great and makes me think about, okay, how do you build community then with other smart people who are thinking deeply about the kinds of topics that we're talking about, right? I think that's an important part of making sure that this is fulfilling.
This has been, super, super, I think interesting, valuable, and every time, even though we're friends, every time I talk with you, I learn more, and it's very inspiring. So, if you were going to, assume that people listening to this are like your audience that you described at one of your events, what are the things that you want to, leave people with from your journey that you think
I
can,
think it's
be valuable?
twofold. You have to know what you're good at and enjoy doing if you want to have a zero to prove life. And the second is maybe a little counterintuitive. People talk a lot about purpose. And I think for me, it's how do you live a purposeful life versus how do you, some people keep looking for purpose. And I think the more interesting is how do you have purpose in your life? When you're talking to a friend, how are you purposeful and aligned with the, good values? When you're talking to your grandkids, when you're doing your work, and that will allow you, it's not about what you do, it's how you do it. That's the message, I think. It's knowing what
Yeah.
you're good at, knowing what you love to do, and then figuring out how does that look like for you and what kind of a life do you want to create? And I feel
Uh,
very, very lucky like you do. I think
yeah.
we're very
Yeah.
privileged to be able to do
Yeah.
what we do.
Yeah, I think well, look, what you said, I think is beautiful and true. And it's this purposeful, as opposed to looking for purpose, be purposeful.
So, Anthony, this has been just a fabulous conversation. And as I reflect on everything we've talked about, in my mind, there are three building blocks or three requirements for anyone to achieve a zero to proof kind of lifestyle. And I wanted to kind of wrap up our conversation and share those. The first
Thank you.
is you had to have found something you really enjoy and love doing, and you're good at doing it, because otherwise you won't want to keep working. So that's one. Two is you have to want to do your work with purpose. And I'm going to make a really key distinction here. Lots of young people and people I coach are seeking their purpose, like as if it's something you find it's out there. And for me, purpose is not a what, it's a how. It's how you do your work. So I'll use myself as an example and then make some connections. So, how I do my work is whenever I do my work and I'm aligned with my purpose, I want to be more connecting with the person. Like my goal is to connect more deeply, and my other goal is to activate that person's strengths and full potential and mine. So when I'm living in my purpose, no matter what I'm doing, if I say hello or thank you to somebody bagging my groceries, I'm causing connection and I'm trying to help them do the best they can do and me the best that I could do. And for we have a friend in common whose purpose I would say is living through compassion. And you can see that in her in no matter anything,
Anything. Yeah. Yes.
right? And I think partially for you, I don't know how you would answer the question, but what I see in you is you are driven by causing, wanting community and networks, like and maybe you could share that in a minute. So it's do you live your are you living purposefully the how you do your work is the second thing. And the third part is that you continue to want to pursue mastery. Like you have to want to continue to learn more, get better at what you do. And in saying all of that, there's like a letting go a little bit of the fear of rejection or approval. Like you kind of get more and more indifferent to what do people think about the way I coach people, that I get vulnerable with them and they get vulnerable with me. And we dive deeply into topics before we come back out into really talking about skills and business. I don't really care that people think that's the way you should coach or not should coach. This is my zero to prove, right? Lastly, I would say it isn't a state of making less money. So it isn't like you made that point really clear in the beginning. This isn't retirement. You could be in a zero to prove life stage and be making more money than you were making when you were working, 90 hours a week. It's like the how you live your life internally and externally with managing work and life together. And it's those three things in my book. So,
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking as you were saying those things, a couple of themes for me. And on the last one, when Lillian and I were going to get married and we were trying to pick someone to marry us, we had met this woman who wrote a book which stays with me forever. You know, uh, Basically, the title of the book is "What Other People Think of Me Is None of My Business," and it kind of comes back to the point you're taking, which is you're also not seeking approval from other people, which is pretty foundational. It's not in any way you're trying to be a jerk. It's that your passion and your success are self-generated, not based on because it's interesting when you think about prove, and I hadn't thought about it until you started saying some of those things. It's also not a need for approval. Um,
absolutely.
and so many people spend a lot of their lives seeking, they're either proving something to a boss, or they're seeking approval. And I hadn't really thought about the synonym. I don't know what the right word would be of those things. And I think that's super important. So anyway, well, look, thank you as
Thank
always.
you.
Yeah, I think that's a great one.